The morning sun shimmered on the calm waters of a private lake where Manny Pacquiao sat quietly in his modest fishing boat. It was his escape from the noise of politics, business, and even boxing. A rare chance to enjoy peace with nothing but a fishing rod, the water, and the occasional splash of a jumping fish. Dressed in a plain t-shirt, shorts, and sandals, he looked like any other man out to enjoy a relaxing weekend. But tranquility never lasts long when entitlement walks in. From the shore, a woman in oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat marched toward the dock, her hands on her hips. She was the type neighbors whispered about, the HOA queen, known for policing lawns, barking about rules, and treating the lake as if she had personally created it. To the community, she was simply Karen. She spotted Manny's boat and scowled. "Excuse me," she shouted, her voice sharp enough to cut through the still air. "You can't park your boat here. This is private property." Manny looked up, calm as ever, and gave her a polite nod. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm just fishing. I'll be here for a little while." Karen rolled her eyes. "No, you won't. The HOA doesn't allow outsiders on this lake. You need to move your boat immediately before I call security." From the nearby clubhouse, a few members of the fishing club turned to watch. Some chuckled, whispering to each other as if they enjoyed the spectacle. To them, Manny looked like a stranger who didn't belong, certainly not the owner of anything. Manny adjusted his fishing rod, unbothered. "I don't think there's a problem here," he said gently. Karen's face reddened. She stomped closer, her voice growing louder. "Don't you argue with me. People like you don't get to make the rules around here. Now move that boat." The laughter of the onlookers grew. Manny's family, sitting quietly on the shore, exchanged nervous glances. Still, Manny remained composed, his voice steady. "I'm not causing trouble," he said softly. "I have every right to be here." Karen smirked, folding her arms. "Oh, really? And who exactly gave you that right?" The crowd leaned in, waiting. They had no idea the answer would shake the entire fishing club to its core. What Manny did next shocked everyone standing there. Karen's words echoed across the still water, each syllable dripping with authority she didn't truly have. The fishing club members lounging by the clubhouse leaned back in their chairs, smirks spreading across their faces as they watched the scene unfold. To them, this was entertainment. Their HOA leader flexing her power against a man they assumed was an outsider. Manny reeled in his line slowly, not out of nervousness, but out of patience. He knew arrogance when he saw it. He had faced roaring crowds, angry opponents, and even political rivals with far more power than this woman. Yet here he was, being treated like an intruder on land he quietly owned. Karen took his silence as defiance. She marched to the dock, heels clicking against the wood, and pointed a finger toward him like a schoolteacher scolding a child. "Sir, this is your last warning," she barked. "Pack up your things and leave this property. You are not allowed on this lake without HOA permission, and you clearly don't have it." Manny looked at her evenly, his tone still respectful. "Ma'am, I'm not breaking any rules. I'm simply fishing." "Please don't raise your voice." The crowd chuckled. One man muttered just loud enough for others to hear. "Who does this guy think he is? Talking back to Karen? He's about to regret it." Karen smirked, emboldened by the laughter. "Oh, I'm raising my voice because people like you don't listen otherwise. You think you're special? This lake doesn't belong to you, so stop acting like it does. Do you even live here?" Manny's wife, sitting nearby with their kids, shifted uncomfortably. She whispered, "Maybe we should just go. It's not worth the argument." But Manny shook his head gently, signaling to her that everything was under control. He turned back to Karen, his voice steady as a stone. "I assure you I have every right to be here. I'm not disturbing anyone. I'm not violating any laws." Karen let out a harsh laugh, the kind meant to humiliate. "Not disturbing anyone? You're disturbing me. And if you disturb me, you disturb the HOA. And if you disturb the HOA, you disturb everyone. That's how it works here. Rules are rules." The fishing club erupted in laughter and applause, clapping as if Karen had delivered a knockout punch. Ironically, the man they mocked had thrown real knockout punches across the world. But none of them recognized him in his casual clothes and humble posture. Karen pulled out her phone and waved it threateningly. "You know what? I'll make this simple. Either you leave now or I'll call security and have you forcibly removed. And if you resist, don't blame me for what happens next." Her voice had grown louder, attracting even more bystanders from nearby homes. A small crowd began gathering by the lake, whispering about the scene unfolding. Some frowned, sensing unfairness while others enjoyed the show, eager to see Karen flex her authority once again. Manny, however, refused to flinch. His calmness contrasted so sharply with Karen's aggression that it unsettled some of the onlookers. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't defensive, he was simply standing his ground with dignity. "Ma'am," Manny said quietly, "you should be careful how you speak to people. Respect is free to give, but very costly when you lose it." The laughter died down for a moment, replaced with uneasy murmurs. Karen blinked, caught off guard by the weight of his words, but she quickly regained her bluster. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Don't try to lecture me about respect. I've been running this club for years. Everyone knows me. Everyone follows the rules. You're nothing but a trespasser trying to play innocent." One of the fishermen added fuel to the fire. "Yeah, go back where you came from." "This is our lake," Karen nodded sharply. "Exactly. And if you don't leave in the next 5 minutes, I promise you'll regret it." The hostility was no longer just hers. It was spreading through the crowd. Manny's wife reached for his hand nervously, but he smiled softly at her. The same reassuring smile he had worn before some of the toughest fights of his life. He turned back to Karen, not raising his voice, not showing anger. "You're making a mistake," he said simply. The crowd leaned forward. They didn't know what he meant, but something in his tone carried an authority that even Karen couldn't ignore. Still, her pride wouldn't allow her to back down. She crossed her arms, tilting her chin up. "The only mistake here is you thinking you belong. But don't worry, I'll fix that." With that, she pressed a button on her phone, loudly declaring she was calling the HOA board and local security to come deal with the trespasser. The bystanders whispered excitedly. Phones came out. Videos started recording. Everyone sensed this was about to explode into something much bigger than a simple argument at the lake. What none of them realized was that the man sitting calmly in that boat didn't just have the right to be there, he owned everything around them. And soon the truth would leave Karen and her entire fishing club stunned into silence. Have you ever dealt with an unreasonable HOA or someone who abused their authority? Comment below and tell us where you're watching this from. Karen paced along the dock, phone pressed tightly to her ear, her shrill voice carrying across the water. "Yes, hello, this is HOA Chairwoman Karen. We've got an intruder on the lake. He refuses to leave. Send security immediately." The fishing club members cheered at her theatrics as if they were watching a live performance. Some pulled out their phones, recording video, no doubt imagining the satisfaction of posting a clip titled, "Trespasser Removed from Private Lake." Manny, however, wasn't moved. He stayed seated in his boat, his posture relaxed, hands resting calmly on the fishing rod. His expression betrayed no anger, no fear, just patience, the kind that comes from years of discipline inside the boxing ring and from serving people outside it. But his family wasn't so composed. On the grassy bank, his wife Jinky leaned closer, her voice low but tense. "Hun, maybe we should go. It's not worth all this. Look at them, they're not stopping." His children, wide-eyed, clung to her side. One whispered, "Dad, why are they so mean?" Manny glanced at them with a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, everything will be fine." Back on the dock, Karen snapped her phone shut with exaggerated drama. "Security is on their way," she announced proudly, as though she had won a great battle. "You'll be escorted off this property in handcuffs if necessary." The club members laughed and clapped. One of them shouted, "Better pack up your little boat before they drag you out of here." Karen smirked. "Honestly, I don't know why people like you think you can just walk in and take whatever you want. You don't belong here, and the rules exist for a reason. To keep this place exclusive. Understand?" Manny tilted his head slightly, meeting her glare with a quiet calm that unsettled a few bystanders. "Exclusive?" he repeated softly. "So only certain people are welcome here?" "Exactly," Karen snapped without hesitation. "We worked hard for this lake. We pay our dues, we follow the rules, and we don't need outsiders ruining it. This is a private community, not some public playground." A murmur rippled through the growing crowd. Some nodded along with Karen, but others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the ugliness in her words. Manny's voice dropped lower, firm but measured. "Everyone deserves respect. Even if you think they don't belong." The laughter faltered. For a brief moment, the air grew heavy, the weight of his words pushing back against Karen's arrogance. But pride is a stubborn shield, and Karen refused to let it crack. She turned to the crowd, seeking their approval. See? This is what happens when you let strangers in. They think they're entitled to whatever they want. Not on my watch, one fisherman shouted. Throw him out already. Another chimed in. Yeah, we don't need people like him messing with our waters. Jinky's face tightened with worry. She reached out again. Please, Manny, let's go before this gets worse. But Manny shook his head gently. No, if we leave now, what lesson will they learn? Sometimes you have to stand, even when it's uncomfortable. His wife's eyes softened with understanding, though her hands still gripped the children protectively. Meanwhile, Karen puffed out her chest, mistaking Manny's calm refusal as weakness. She marched closer to the edge of the dock, standing just feet away from his boat. You think staying quiet makes you strong? You're wrong. This is my lake, my rules. And soon, security will show you the consequences. Manny gazed at her steadily, his expression unchanged. You should be very sure about what belongs to you before you speak so boldly. The crowd buzzed with whispers. A teenager recording on his phone muttered to his friend, Man, this guy doesn't look scared at all. But Karen only grew louder, her voice nearly a scream now. Don't you dare lecture me. You're a trespasser, and people like you need to learn their place. When security arrives, you'll be banned from this lake forever. The words people like you hung in the air, bitter and heavy. Several bystanders exchanged uneasy looks. Some had come just to laugh, but now they shifted uncomfortably, sensing that this wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about power, prejudice, and entitlement. Manny didn't rise to the insult. He didn't shout back, didn't threaten, didn't even move. Instead, he simply leaned back in his chair, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Karen's rage. Sometimes, he said softly, the louder a person shouts, the more they reveal about themselves. Karen froze, her face reddening. The crowd fell silent, the words landing heavier than a punch. For the first time, doubt flickered in the eyes of the fishing club members. But pride, once wounded, grows sharper. Karen raised her chin high and sneered. We'll see how calm you are when they drag you out of here in front of your family. Phones continued recording. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Security had not yet arrived. But something told everyone watching that this wasn't going to end the way Karen thought. Because the quiet man she mocked, the one she accused of trespassing, wasn't just another visitor. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't powerless. He was the man who owned the very water she claimed to protect. And soon, the truth would crash down on her, harder than any wave in the lake. The crowd by the lakeshore had grown larger. What started as a handful of curious onlookers was now dozens of neighbors, HOA members and passers-by, who had been drawn in by Karen's booming voice. Nearly all of them had their phones out recording. Karen thrived on the attention. She waved her hands dramatically, retelling the situation to newcomers as if she were the heroic guardian of the lake. This man refuses to leave. He thinks the rules don't apply to him. But don't worry, I'll take care of it. Nobody disrespects the HOA. Some nodded in approval, clapping half-heartedly, but others weren't so sure. A few in the crowd squinted at Manny, tilting their heads as if something about him looked familiar. Hey, one young man whispered to his friend. Doesn't that guy look like, Manny Pacquiao? The friend frowned, peering closer. Pacquiao? Now, why would Manny Pacquiao be fishing here? That doesn't make sense. Another voice chimed in from behind them. No, I think it is him. Look at his face. That's the champion, the senator from the Philippines. I've seen him on TV 100 times. The whispers grew louder, rippling through the crowd. Manny Pacquiao, really? Some were skeptical, others convinced. But one thing was clear. The man sitting calmly in the boat was no ordinary trespasser. Karen, however, paid no attention. She was too busy feeding off the spotlight. Don't be fooled by his calm act, she snapped, glaring at Manny. This is exactly how trespassers operate. They act innocent, but they're breaking the rules. And rules matter more than feelings. Manny sat quietly, listening to the whispers spread. He didn't correct anyone. He didn't announce who he was. He didn't need to. For him, this wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about dignity. About showing that respect is something all people deserve, not just celebrities. On the shore, Jinky squeezed his hand, her voice soft but worried. They're starting to recognize you. Maybe it's time to say something. But Manny shook his head gently. Not yet. Meanwhile, one older man in the crowd finally spoke up, loud enough for Karen to hear. Ma'am, I think you've made a mistake. That's Manny Pacquiao you're yelling at. The crowd stirred, heads nodding, voices overlapping. Yeah, it looks like him. That's definitely Pacquiao. No way Karen's talking like that to the Manny Pacquiao. Karen froze for a split second, then let out a mocking laugh. Oh, please. Do you people really think the Manny Pacquiao would be sitting in a dingy little boat on our lake? Don't be ridiculous. This is just some stubborn fisherman who thinks he's special. The crowd erupted in mixed reactions. Some laughed with Karen, but others shook their heads, whispering again, "She doesn't get it." That really is him. One teenager stepped forward, phone in hand, showing a picture on his screen. Look, here's Manny Pacquiao online. Compare it to him. It's the same person. Karen swatted the air dismissively. Enough of this nonsense. I don't care who he looks like. He's not above the rules. Even if he were Manny Pacquiao, which he's not, this is my lake to manage, and I say he leaves. The arrogance in her voice stunned even some of her supporters. One fisherman muttered under his breath, "Careful, Karen. If that really is Pacquiao, this could backfire." But Karen doubled down, pointing a finger at Manny's boat again. Stop pretending to be someone important and move before security gets here. The tension was thick now. Every word she spoke was being recorded. Every sneer and insult documented by dozens of phones. The crowd wasn't just watching, they were waiting. Waiting to see how Manny would respond. Waiting to see if the whispers of his identity would be confirmed. And still Manny sat there, patient as ever. He wasn't rushing the truth. He wasn't demanding recognition. He was letting Karen reveal herself, her arrogance, her prejudice, her abuse of authority. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but strong. "You don't know me, ma'am, and that's fine. I don't need recognition. But one day soon you'll understand that respect should be given freely, not only to those you think are worthy." The words cut deeper than any shout could. The crowd murmured, torn between shock and admiration. Even those who didn't believe he was Manny Pacquiao couldn't deny the weight behind his calm tone. Karen, however, smirked, as if she'd already won. "Save your speeches. I've dealt with troublemakers before, and I'll deal with you the same way." She turned back to the crowd, expecting applause. Instead, she was met with uneasy silence. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were growing into certainty. More and more people recognized him. Look at the way he carries himself. That's Pacquiao. No doubt about it. She's harassing Manny Pacquiao, on camera. But Karen, blinded by pride, couldn't see what everyone else was beginning to realize. She thought she was humiliating a trespasser. In reality, she was humiliating herself, in front of the very man who owned the water beneath her feet. Karen stood tall on the dock, arms crossed, her expression smug with self-importance. The crowd behind her murmured uneasily, their whispers growing louder by the second. More and more people were convinced that the man in the modest fishing boat wasn't just any fisherman, but Karen didn't care. She mistook their hesitation for agreement, their whispers for admiration. In her mind, she had the crowd on her side. "You see," she said loudly, turning halfway toward the people watching, "this is exactly why rules exist. If we let one outsider break them, the whole system falls apart. That's why I'm strict. That's why this community trusts me. Because I keep order." Some nodded politely, but others folded their arms, frowning. The words didn't land the way they used to. Something about the quiet man in the boat, his patience, his composure, was unsettling. And then, for the first time since the ordeal began, Manny Pacquiao straightened his posture, set his fishing rod aside, and rose to his feet. The small boat rocked gently beneath him, but he stood steady, balanced, unshaken. The crowd hushed. Phones rose higher, cameras zoomed in. Karen narrowed her eyes. "Finally ready to listen?" She sneered. Manny's gaze swept across the faces gathered at the lake. His voice, though not loud, carried an unmistakable authority, the kind of tone that silences a room without shouting. "I've been patient," he began. "I've allowed you to speak, to shout, to insult. But now I need you all to hear me clearly." The murmurs died instantly. Even Karen blinked, momentarily thrown off by the strength in his voice. "Respect," Manny continued, "isn't about titles. It isn't about rules written on paper. It isn't about who shouts the loudest. Respect is about how you treat people, even when you think they're nobody." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few lowered their phones, realizing this was no longer just an argument. It was a lesson. Karen scoffed, though her voice wavered slightly. Don't lecture me about respect. I've been running this HOA for years. I know what respect means. Manny shook his head gently. If you truly knew, you wouldn't speak to people the way you've spoken to me today. You wouldn't point fingers, mock, or judge without cause. His words landed heavy, echoing across the still water. For the first time, Karen looked unsettled. Her cheeks flushed, not from anger this time, but from the faint sting of embarrassment. The crowd began to murmur again, but differently now. No longer whispers of who is he, but of he's right. One elderly woman near the back called out softly, "He's telling the truth." Karen snapped her head around, glaring at the woman. "Don't encourage him. This man is breaking the rules." But her voice didn't carry the same weight anymore. The people were listening to Manny now. He raised his hand slightly, not to silence the crowd, but to focus them. Too often, people in positions of small power think it makes them great. They use it to control, to belittle, to exclude. But true strength, true leadership, comes from humility, from lifting others up, not tearing them down. The words struck harder than any punch. Dozens of phones caught every syllable, broadcasting his message live to feeds that would soon explode across the internet. Karen clenched her fists. "Enough. You think you can stand here and embarrass me in front of my community? You're just..." Manny's eyes met hers, calm but unyielding. "I don't need to embarrass you. You're doing that yourself." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's mouth hung open, speechless for the first time. A fisherman who had laughed earlier now muttered, "Man, maybe we've been wrong about this." Another whispered, "I think that really is Pacquiao." Who else talks like that and stays that calm? The tide was turning. Karen could feel it, but pride is a dangerous anchor. She jutted out her chin, desperate to maintain control. "You talk big for someone who doesn't belong here, but all your pretty words mean nothing. When security gets here, you'll be gone." Manny let the silence stretch for a moment, then said softly, "I'm not afraid of security. I'm not afraid of being removed, because truth doesn't need permission to exist. And whether you see it now or later, the truth always wins." The crowd erupted, not in laughter this time, but in quiet applause. Some clapped timidly, others more firmly, but the energy had shifted. The man Karen had mocked was no longer a trespasser in their eyes. He was a voice of reason, a man of dignity standing tall against arrogance. Karen spun around, her face burning. "Stop clapping. He's manipulating you," she shouted. But the more she protested, the more isolated she became. Manny sat back down in his boat, his point made. He didn't need to say more. He had planted the seed of truth and everyone present felt it. Security was still on the way, but the crowd no longer looked at Manny as a stranger. They looked at him with respect. And when the truth of who he really was finally came out, Karen's humiliation would be complete. The crowd's energy had shifted completely. Where there had once been chuckles and jeers, now there was silence, whispers, and even applause. Karen's voice, once so sharp and commanding, was now drowned out by the weight of Manny's calm words. But Karen wasn't ready to let go. Pride tightened her jaw as she barked at the onlookers. "Don't fall for his act. He's just another trespasser. Security will set things straight." Her words lacked conviction. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. People were no longer laughing with her. They were questioning her. And then, through the hum of voices, one bystander's shout cut through like a bell. "That's Manny Pacquiao." Dozens of heads turned at once. The name rippled through the crowd like a wave. "Yes, that's him." "No way, the world champion. I saw him on TV during a fight. That's definitely him. And he's a senator too, right?" Karen froze, blinking rapidly. "What?" she stammered, her face flushing. No, that can't be true." But the evidence was overwhelming. Several bystanders quickly pulled up images and videos on their phones, holding them up to compare. Side by side, the resemblance was undeniable. The man standing in that small boat wasn't just some random fisherman. He was one of the most famous athletes in the world, a global icon known for his humility, generosity, and fighting spirit. "Manny Pacquiao," someone whispered reverently. "He's here in our lake?" Karen's smug smile cracked, her confidence melting under the heat of realization. She opened her mouth to argue again, but was interrupted by a sharp gasp from the fishing club behind her. "Wait a second," one of the older men muttered. "If that really is Pacquiao, then doesn't that mean..." Before he could finish, another voice, this time from a man in a crisp uniform walking briskly toward the dock, spoke clearly. It was the head of the local security team summoned by Karen's call. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "I think you've made a mistake." Karen whipped around, relief flashing in her eyes. "Finally, you're here to remove this trespasser. He refuses to leave the lake." But the officer didn't move toward Manny. Instead, he gave a respectful nod to the man standing tall in the boat. "Good afternoon, Senator Pacquiao. I didn't know you were visiting today." The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, and murmurs collided in the air. Phones zoomed in closer, capturing the moment Karen's face fell, drained of color. Manny simply returned the officer's nod. "Good afternoon," he said calmly, as though this were just another ordinary encounter. Karen sputtered, pointing frantically at him. "Senator?" "No, no, no! This can't." The officer cut her off gently but firmly. "Ma'am, you should know. This lake isn't managed by the HOA. It's private property, owned outright." He gestured respectfully toward Manny. "Owned by Senator Pacquiao." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's mouth hung open. The fishing club members who had been laughing moments ago now stared at Manny with wide eyes, shame written across their faces. "You," Karen finally managed to choke out, her voice trembling. "You own the lake?" Manny looked at her, his expression steady but not cruel. "Yes," he said softly. "This lake belongs to me. I allowed your club to use it out of goodwill. But today..." His voice grew firmer, echoing across the stunned crowd. "You showed me how little you value respect. Not just for me, but for anyone you think doesn't belong." The words hit harder than any blow. Karen's knees wobbled. The club members shifted nervously, realizing what their mockery had cost them. The officer cleared his throat, stepping back respectfully. "Senator, how would you like to proceed?" All eyes turned to Manny. He could have gloated. He could have humiliated Karen the way she tried to humiliate him. He could have shouted, "This is my lake, get out!" But he didn't. Instead, he spoke with the same calm dignity he had carried all along. "I don't need to humiliate anyone," he said. "But I do need to make something clear. No one, not Karen, not the fishing club, not anyone, has the right to treat people with disrespect. This lake was meant to be a place of peace, a place to enjoy nature. If it becomes a place of arrogance and exclusion, then it no longer serves its purpose." He turned toward the fishing club members, his voice steady but commanding. "From this day forward, your permission to use this lake is revoked. It's time you learned that privileges are not rights and respect is not optional." The crowd gasped. The fishermen exchanged horrified glances. Karen let out a strangled sound, her eyes wide with disbelief. You can't do that," she sputtered. "We've been here for years. You can't just..." "I can," Manny interrupted calmly, "because this lake is mine. And today I've seen enough to know that giving it to people who abuse others is a mistake I won't make again." The officer nodded solemnly, already signaling his team to escort the fishing club off the property. Karen stumbled backward, her voice breaking. No, please. This isn't fair!" But the irony was lost on no one. For years, Karen had been the one using rules as a weapon. Now faced with the truth, she was powerless. The crowd erupted into cheers. Not for her, but for Manny. Applause rippled through the lakeshore as phones captured every second. In that moment, Karen wasn't the enforcer of the HOA. She was the cautionary tale. Manny, meanwhile, stood quietly in his boat, his expression unchanged. He hadn't gloated, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't lashed out. He had simply revealed the truth, and in doing so, let Karen's own arrogance undo her. The cheers echoed across the lake, drowning out Karen's frantic protests. The HOA queen, who had strutted onto the dock with pride, now stood pale and trembling, her authority shattered. Around her, the fishing club members hung their heads, embarrassed, unable to meet Manny's gaze. Security escorted them quietly, not with force, but with a firm hand of consequence. The very people who had laughed at Manny just minutes earlier were now shuffling away under the weight of their own shame. Karen tried one last plea, her voice cracking. "Please, I was only trying to enforce the rules. I didn't know who you were." Manny's calm eyes rested on her. "You shouldn't have needed to know who I was. Respect should not depend on someone's name or status. You treated me the way you did because you assumed I was nobody. That's where you went wrong." The crowd fell silent again. Dozens of phones captured his words, knowing they would soon travel far beyond the shores of this lake. Jinky and the children stepped closer to Manny. His wife gave his hand a quiet squeeze, proud of how he had handled the ordeal. His kids looked at him with awe, not because he had revealed his power, but because he had shown them how dignity and patience win battles. Arrogance can never win. By the time the fishing club had been escorted away, the lake was no longer buzzing with tension, but with admiration. Neighbors who had stayed silent earlier now approached cautiously, some apologizing for not stepping in, others simply thanking Manny for his grace. That evening, the videos hit the internet. Clips spread across TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube under titles like HOA Karen harasses Manny Pacquiao. Big mistake. Man calmly destroys HOA with one sentence. Karen didn't know he owned the lake. Within hours, millions of views poured in. Comment sections lit up. This is the most satisfying thing I've seen all week. Pacquiao is a legend, not just in the ring, but in life. Imagine trying to flex HOA power over a man who literally owns the lake. Karen's name wasn't spared. Her neighbors quickly recognized her, and the backlash was swift. She was removed from her position as HOA chairwoman after years of lording power over others. The fishing club, once proud of their exclusivity, found themselves banned from the very waters they had mocked Manny on. But Manny? He never gloated. In fact, when reporters later asked him about the incident, he downplayed it. "I don't want to make anyone the villain," he said calmly. "We all make mistakes. But we must remember, rules and authority should not be used to belittle others. Respect must be given freely, no matter who someone is or where they come from." His words turned the viral moment into more than entertainment. It became a lesson. Schools shared the video as an example of humility under pressure. Community leaders praised his restraint. Even people who had never watched a boxing match found themselves inspired by the quiet dignity of a man who could have humiliated his aggressors but chose instead to teach them. Back at the lake, peace returned. Without the toxic presence of the fishing club, families and neighbors began to enjoy the water again. Children splashed at the shore, couples paddled small boats, and laughter replaced tension. The lake once again became what Manny had intended it to be, a place of rest, not conflict. One evening, weeks later, a neighbor approached him shyly. "Senator, or should I say champ, I just want to thank you. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for everyone who's ever been judged unfairly." Manny smiled, shaking the man's hand. "Respect is like water," he replied. "It flows freely when you let it. But if you try to control it, to hoard it, it dries up." I hope we all learned something that day. And indeed they had. The story lived on, not just as another viral Karen video, but as a reminder that true strength isn't loud, prideful, or arrogant. True strength is calm. It's humble. It's the ability to stand tall in the face of disrespect without losing your dignity. As for Karen, her downfall was complete. She avoided the lake entirely, humiliated by the very community she once tried to control. But perhaps even in her shame, she had learned the lesson Manny had so gracefully delivered. Power means nothing without respect. And Manny? He went back to his boat, his fishing rod, and the quiet joy of the lake. To him, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about reminding the world that every person deserves respect, whether they're a senator, a world champion, or just a man in a boat. If you believe no one should be judged by appearance or treated unfairly, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one.